All right, aloha everyone, and welcome to another session of DDO Hawaiian Style here on DDO Stream. I'm your host, NomadDog. Hope you guys are having a fantastic week, and mahalo for joining today as we continue exploring Dungeons & Dragons Online. This week, we got a special one. We're taking a look at the history of Mabar and Night Revels, and joining me today is a special guest, Tolero, producer for DDO. Thank you so much for hanging out and talking story with me today.
Absolutely. Happy to be here.
All right, so we are in the midst of Night Revels now, and I thought it would be pretty cool to take some time and sit down and do a deep dive on the event itself and just everything that's happened over the last 15 years with Mabar and Night Revels. I've been doing a stream here. We take a look at updates, and as we've gone along, we have the updates with Mabars and Night Revels, and got to talk a little bit about it, but never really got to do a whole deep dive on it. So I thought it'd be interesting to do something along those lines. So to start us off, what I'd like to do is roll the clock back to 2010, early 2010. DDO has been free to play for a few months now. Rizia Ice Games happened in February of 2010. And now you guys are sitting around the office probably thinking, okay, what else do we do for autumnal event, for any events for the seasons? Can you talk a little bit about what the discussion was around the office about making new events?
Sure. It's kind of interesting because you kind of have to look at the history of DDO events in general. When the game first came out, before it was even free to play, initially we didn't have any seasonal festivals really. And we had gone back and forth. And before I had even joined the company, they had done one seasonal festival, which was the festival that happened in December ish. And we sort of went back and forth because on one hand, people were like, well, do we want to bring in real world holiday nods into this place? It's very clearly a completely different setting. Is that going to be kind of beyond the fourth wall? Is it going to kind of. But then as we looked at other games, we're like, look, a lot of other MMOs are doing this. People do seem to appreciate it. It's a nice change up when you're playing to have these sort of festive moments. So we're like, yeah, let's go ahead and do some more. And then somehow we got in this pattern where they kept making events that were winter themed. And so we would have Rizia, and there was even like a winter game that we never even got around to doing. And at some point we were like, can we please have a different season besides winter? So we were talking about, okay, which ones do we want to do? Several of us were huge Halloween fans. So I'm a big Halloween fan, as a lot of people know. The community manager at the time, big time Halloween fan. And it was just kind of like a internal lobbying process of what season did we want to go after. And so fall was sort of the winner. But the trick was we didn't have a lot of source material about spooky festivalness because this was back during an era where Wizards of the Coast was largely having us sort of, lay out what we wanted for lore. And so it was, we would make a thing, they would kind of look it over and say whether it seems all right or not, and then we'd go from there, as opposed to other types of content where we're able to take an existing module, look at it, and go, ah, yes, we want this piece and this piece. City of Stormreach was a book that hadn't, I think it was either just coming out or it was just timing wise, it didn't line up with when we were doing our work. So we were like, we're going to have to invent something from whole cloth. And so the direction we went was, well, the other trick is that the place where the game was set at the time, we weren't yet doing any of the Cormier content. We were still all primarily in Zendrick, which is very, where Stormreach, etc. is very tropical. So you're not getting that like changing of the seasons kind of thing. So we're like, well, how else would people denote when they were going to have a holiday? So we're like, oh, the shifting of the planes. The planes made the most sense to try to, if we're going to look at something that is changing, we'd already established that the planes have, a changing rotation effect on, say, the festival event. So we're like, what if we now say we'll pick another plane that makes a lot of sense in terms of the season that we're trying to emulate, but we pick one that's going to be a good link. And so for us, a really good one was Mabar, because we wanted something that was spooky and dark, but not like outright evil. Like that seemed to be a good plane to kind of target. And then we sort of built from there, essentially taking, okay, what thematic things will make sense for Mabar, but still feel spooky when you bring it into DDO, and you can still kind of get what we're going for and kind of have that nice, like, oh, that's neat, or oh, that's fun and festive, but while still feeling enough a part of the game setting.
Yeah, I remember the first time I stepped off the airship tower in House Jurasco, and I saw this message pop up across my screen that says Manifest Zone, Mabar Plane of Endless Night. I'm like, what the heck is going on?
Yeah. Yeah.
And
'Cause
so
manifest zones were like the nice Eberron thing for us. So it was like when the planes get too close, a pocket of that will start to exist in your plane. Like you see that in Prison of the Planes, right? The whole notion of that dungeon is the idea that there's a weakness in the boundary between the planes and it's starting to leach in. And we've had that in several places, but this was a time where we're like, you know what? We're going to use this specifically for festive purposes.
um how so once you guys had the idea for the event, or you're going to do something for fall, um how long was the development process for something like
That one was about a real update's worth of work because at the first iteration of it that we did, because it involved, touching a lot of different things, right? We're touching weird parts of the lands of the, public areas that we normally don't do and trying to kinda take tech that normally exists inside dungeons and pull it into a public area, and that was kinda new for us. We had to build out rewards for it. When it came to the dragon, once we got around to doing, dragon stuff, that was essentially raid work. So it's about an update's worth of work. Now we would sort of run that work in parallel to other things we were doing because we didn't wanna have sort of a dead spot. So it was sort of like that amount of work, but stretched out a little bit as we sort of chipped away at it. Because one of the things we knew is that we wanted this to be a festival, and therefore we couldn't let festivals sort of take too much away from like regular development cycles because they're meant to be sort of at the time when we were doing festivals, festivals were meant to be kind of just an interlude, just kind of a break in your normal routine. And it wasn't until much later that we changed our philosophy around what we think the relationship between festive events and DDO should be. But at that time, the methodology was this is something that you go and you play around with for a little bit and then go back to your sort of normal routine.
because I know the original Maybar Endless Night Festival ran for what, about 2 weeks, I think.
I think so,
Yeah.
yeah. That tended to be about the time because it felt like a lot of stuff we were making, since we only wanted it to be sort of a brief distraction that you then go back to normal gameplay. We're like, your first weekend, you're figuring it out. Your second weekend, you pretty much got your routine down, and also anybody who wasn't there the first week could show up. But once you kind of went past that, it seemed like people were kind of bored and kind of done with it. So we tended to run it for about 2 weeks.
What were some of the difficulties that you guys encountered? You talked a little bit about having to bring some of the tech from dungeons out to public areas. Were there other things that kind of threw up roadblocks when you guys were trying to develop the event?
A big one really was just getting the public area to play nice with this type of gameplay. For example, public areas are non-combat zones normally, and so then we had to think about, well, if we start pulling stuff into public areas, how will the players engage with it? Because one of the things we had learned from doing the tent event back in the day was even though players had appreciated all like the portals are spawning in and there's devils all over the marketplace, they didn't have their normal host of abilities to use against them because they were non-combat areas, and so you're like you kinda just went down your abilities list going, "Well, I can hit them with my sword, that seems to still be working, but this spell doesn't work, this ability doesn't work, neither does this one," because you would try them and it would say, You can't cast this in a public area." And so we're like, "Well, we want this area to be for fighting, how do we accommodate that?" So it was like trying to figure out, like, do we want to just leave it the way it is? Do we want to have an engineer go in and meddle with things? And then just how many things can we put in here? Because dungeons have a kind of a prescribed way that we can build them. When you got into the public area, we're like, well, public areas don't have what we call a under the hood. There's a thing that internally we call the dungeon master. Dungeon master is the one who knows what's going on in a given instance, essentially. Public areas don't have a dungeon master because there's no stuff happening. It's all set pieces and other things, but it's not like a quest with like a kill count or anything. So we're like, well, without Dungeon Master, now how do we mark how the player plays through this? So there was just a lot of it was just the fact that we were doing something in an area where there was a lot more people, a lot less of the standard tech than you see inside the instances, and then just kind of unexplored. What happens if I put this here? Does it just break?
Interesting. Um, so it kind of leads us. We're talking about the public area. Was Tolera's always the no-brainer decision, or were there any other areas that you guys considered to put the event?
Runner-up place we considered was Necropolis, because Necropolis had also been around for a long time. It's also very spooky. It also has, like gravestones and stuff like that. But we thought that Dolores just had an even stronger spooky vibe than the Necropolis did, because the Necropolis was a little specialized, right? It has some very specific trees and certain things that are really trying to tell the story of what's going on there. Whereas Dolores, because it's very early in the game, it has more of that super traditional creepy graveyard kind of effect. And it also the terrain is much more interesting because you have that sort of like rolling
Mm-hmm.
hill kind of effect happening, whereas Necropolis is a little bit more flat. So we just liked it more, and so it ended up being the winner.
Gotcha. All right. So you guys get everything kind of sorted out and you get ready to roll this out. I want to talk a little bit about the structure of the event itself. So Dolera's, if I'm remembering correctly, there was a point where in order to enter Dolera's, you had to have had the adventure pack. I don't remember if that changed when we did Mabar or if that happened before. Being able to get in without having to have the adventure pack.
I I believe that happened either just before or during, because at the time, we actually had to do a little bit of surgery in the graveyard because the graveyard used to end at a certain spot, and we basically built out even more pathways and things towards the back where the dragon encounter would happen that didn't always exist in the original. And that was a big thing. We're like, we need a place where people can go and have fun. But I'm pretty sure it's been a long time, but I'm pretty sure we at some point let people into the graveyard space itself because that was where our Gary Gygax memorial
Mm,
was. And
okay,
so we didn't want to paywall that.
gotcha. Okay, so now we have this area where mobs randomly spawn, um, and people would go in. I always enjoyed it because people would go in, get a group together, and just run around and just kill a whole bunch of things. You'd get your collectibles, and then at some point you turn those collectibles in. If I remember correctly, the original amount was 20,000 for the server.
I think so. Yeah.
And then I believe it was lowered to 10,000 later on. Um, do you remember any feedback you guys got about that mechanic about having to get all those collectibles and turn them in with regards to how people felt about having to wait for the summoning chamber to open?
So the methodology we were using was very similar to what we had tried to do back during the tent event was actually the first time we had tried that sort of the server works together, they try to do an action so many times and then collectively once they perform the action, boom, it opens the thing. And we had had a lot of success with that during the tent event, so we're like, well, let's try it again here and see what happens. And it was a matter of tuning it because we were like, well, how many do we need this time? Because the tent event had a smaller number of people than what we were having with this because free to play obviously radically changed DDO's
Mm-hmm.
population compared to what it had been back during the tent event. So we're like, well, this is how many we had them turn in during the tent event. And here's the nature of what they were doing during the tent event. So if we do that, kind of multiply it out, let's see if that amount will work. And also, we knew one of the other challenges would be, well, the very first opening weekend is going to be when everybody's going to try it. And then the second weekend is when you find out who is like, it's not for me. And they're going to wander off and do something else, leaving everybody else to have to basically do their share. So we had even talked about, do we want to sort of stagger how much people have to do based on, we were basically monitoring it as people played to see, okay, are they still turning in the collectibles at a good clip? Because you're going to have one person that only does a little bit. Maybe this other person is going to really go ham and really throw themselves at it. And then we're sort of watching the rates and we're like, is it progressing at a good enough pace? Is the encounter opening as often as we want to see it open? So that was just at the time a lot of active monitoring and trying to tune as we went. And so that's always going to be, you kind of look, and some people are like, I want to be in there all the time. I want to fight that dragon. And you have to balance that against like, well, okay, we also want you out, going and fighting the other stuff and getting the spooky vibes and then going in to fight the dragon. Because that was the other trick, is once everybody had piled into the dragon, and if you were somebody that came in late and missed the show, you're like, well, do I go and gather the widgets now while I wait for everybody else to get done with the dragon so that I can try to trip the next one? So it was really watching and adjusting as we went.
Because I know one of the frustrations that I had encountered is if you have a limited amount of playtime and you try to get in there, or if you were in a time zone where your server population wasn't as active, you might not ever get to go in and do the raid part. And I know that was a frustration for some people. So we'll talk more as we go through. We'll talk more about how that's kind of evolved over time. But let's talk about the summoning chamber, because that for me is like the centerpiece of the original Mabar Endless Night Festival. So you spend all this time collecting all these collectibles, you're turning them in, and then you get this door that opens, giant door in the back of Tolero's, which isn't there anymore. I was sad when I saw that they had taken that out. But the door would open, and then you would have your time frame to get in there. Remember correctly, I think the doors were open for 10 minutes, and then you had 30 minutes to complete the dungeon once the doors closed. Well, let's talk about the structure of this. We'll call it a raid, because that's essentially what it was. It had more people than any other raid that we've ever had in the game. So it was 24 people. How did you guys decide that you're going to try to cram 24 people into a dungeon?
So it was a couple of things. One is that we knew that there is sort of the game was designed around an optimal performance of 6 people. Raids were sort of added in after the fact, 12 people early in the game's development, but not so early that they retold the entire game to work well with 12 people. They just sort of increased it to 12 and crossed their fingers and hoped that it would work. And it seemed to. And so they're like, well, we increased it to 12 last time. Surely we can increase again. And so they went with the number 24 because that was a number that we had seen one of our sister games that run on the same game engine handle. So they're like, if we do 24, that should be safe enough. Because we know once you get above that, like a lot of people, I don't know if everybody knows, like prior to DDO's existence, I used to play one of our sister games, which is EverQuest. So I used to be in a big raiding guild, and you'd have like the oodles and oodles and oodles of people all smashed together, and you'd take forever to get all your people together to go do it. And then everybody had their sort of assigned groups, and it was a whole big thing. And so I was very used to that. And we realized very quickly after the tent event that DDO definitely doesn't handle that amount of people, at least on the technology that we had at the time. But we're like 24 feels like a pretty decent number. It's enough people that it feels meaningful. It's a big group. It's more, it's not just a dozen people. It's a whole bunch of people. But it's not so many people that it's just going to absolutely die when everybody crowds together. So that was sort of the quantity of people that we went with, was trying to find what do we think the game can handle versus what makes it feel like a big raid.
So the interesting thing was the coordination that was needed in order to get that done. I'm going to throw the map up.
Yeah.
So the folks in chat can see it. So this is the original map from the from the uh, the Eternity raid, basically, for Mabar Endless Night Festival. Interesting thing about this is it's broken up into 4 quadrants. And these 4 quadrants, you got basically 2 areas that have to be monitored. You had the area down below, and then you had the levers up top. And you spawned in at random areas, if I remember correctly. One of the interesting things was we have a 24-person dungeon, but the largest party you can go in with was 12. And so now you have to figure out a way to communicate between the 12 people you have and the other 12 people in the dungeon. How did people do that, Tolero? Because most people were not using Mumble. Most people were not using TeamSpeak. Some were. Discord wasn't really a thing yet. How were they communicating with each other to get everything coordinated if you can only have 12 people in your party?
It kind of varied. So some people, there were cliques of people using their own sort of, voice solutions where they'd try to pile into the available popular voice platforms of its time. Some people would have like a point person in each of the groups, and they would like send each other tells, or they try to use the area chat. Because the trick with the area chat was not a lot of people knew how to use the area chat, because unlike other games, DDO didn't have, say, like a global general channel in the game. Some people had figured out how to use the user channel chats pretty well. And that's the thing where you can do like a /join channel space, whatever you want to call your room. And then anybody who does that joins and you can all hear each other no matter where you are. But not everybody knew how to use that either. And so it was like everybody was trying lots of different strategies for this. And some people, there are still people to this day that don't actually actively communicate with each other in that way. They will literally just intuit from watching each other, like, oh, that person's handling that part, then I'm not going to bother because they seem like they've got it. So I'm going to go over here. And they would sort of just silently feel it out, as long as like the two groups seem like they kind of had it under control. So it's very fascinating to me, the people that are able to go through. I've seen them do, regular dungeons this way too. You get in a pug and the other people never say a word to you. People seem to know what to do. And as long as it looks like they've got the part that they're supposed to do, and I guess I'll do part two, and seems like it's going to be okay. So it's just really fascinating to watch because everybody seemed to be doing something a little different.
I know for us, it was a lot of let's type in general chat, trying to communicate back and forth with the other groups. So I guess my next question is, can you talk a little bit about the specific mechanics for the raid itself and some of the issues that came up that you guys discovered as we were trying to do the raid itself? Because there were some things that made it more difficult than it probably should have been.
Yeah. The high level idea was that people would have to split out. People would have to be, fighting sort of side wings essentially until they could get to a point where they could activate certain things. Like the story of it was you're trying to get Eternity under control, and that one of the ways you can do that is exposing Eternity to lighting effects. And once you did that, then you'd have people go down and deal with Eternity, but you still needed people up top dealing with the other stuff. Um, so it was, in our case, because it was a very different kind of space, because this was much more similar to us taking a public area and making it think that it is a private raid instance. So it was sort of this weird hybrid. And so that introduces some technological consequences. And then the other big challenge we had was performance. Um, DDO is generally, the way the monsters all fight each other and the way they think about what they have to fight. They're sort of designed to be optimally looking after X number of their allies. Like if the monster has, if it's flanked by like a couple of other skeletons, right? It's treating those as its allies. And then it assumes 6-ish other player AIs, and then some quantity of assistant enemy AIs the player has summoned, such as pets or artificer dogs. So once you get above that number, then it can start to struggle. And so it can have that struggle in a raid, but when you get 24 players, it's sort of like an exponential problem, essentially, depending on what critters we had in there. And so when those monsters are having to run all of their complex calculations that they do for combat and movement against that big block of player data, it really became difficult for us to get it to behave. Like, we tried lots of different things under the scenes to try to optimize how things were thinking about what they were fighting to try to help with it. Or, oh, maybe if we change this aspect of it, it'll be more efficient and it'll allow them to have the 24 people going at it and not be quite as upset on the lag end of the spectrum. And it became kind of insurmountable at that point. Like, we liked the idea of having this 24-person event, this raid, but we could not get the game to basically handle it.
I remember a lot of people would DNC balls and blade barriers were the methods of choice to take care of the gargoyles that were in there. And I remember a lot of people thought that it was the God knows how many autosphere of dancing or how many blade barriers were flying around in there that was causing the performance issue. Did that have a significant impact on it, or was it mainly just the AIs, the mob AI that was causing the issue?
It's often about what the AI is trying to do. Sometimes you can have 20 of a thing and it's fine, but then 20 of a thing, and when they interact with a certain ability or a certain spell, all of a sudden it's not. Like, you take Blade Barrier, for example. The old school way that Blade Barrier was designed, it was having to run those calculations a lot more often than when we changed it. Like, people used to do, like, say, stacked Blade
Mm-hmm.
Barriers, and you pile as many as you could, essentially, and then have stuff walk through it because it would get smacked by every single one. And so then we tried to change it up to where, okay, if the Blade Barriers are touching, that only counts once. So then, people will space them to still try to get that. And so as the monsters are sort of getting smacked by that, depending on how it's running, that calculation can be a thing. If Auto's dance is trying to dance a larger amount of things than it's used to doing, could be a thing. Like, in a normal dungeon, 6 to 12 people, there's only going to be X number of auto spheres because they have, a cooldown time. They last a certain length. If you have all your meta magics running, well, now you've just taken that number and made it even bigger. So there can be even more of them simultaneously running than what would normally be there. I also remember at the time, I believe there were some shadowy creatures, if I remember right, in that one, and we found some weird behavior with the shadows specifically. One of the things that can happen with monsters, really with any critter that's in the game, whether it's a friend or foe, monsters have very complex logic when they do their fighting, right? Because they're trying to look through all the D&D abilities that they have available to them. They try to activate them under certain circumstances. And if somebody has coded up the monster in a way that has, like, a weird recursive loop in it somewhere that someone missed, that maybe it only triggers under certain circumstances, it can take us time to find, oh, that's why that's acting up. We have a lot more tools now than we did back in, 2010 to say, ooh, this one monster, it's got an infinite loop here in this attack sequence. When somebody comes in, it's trying to do this and it can't, and then its little brain just choose that cycle until it's lagging everything around it out.
So the other interesting mechanic was you had to save the shrines, right? Because you had to activate all 4 shrines in order to get Eternity to show up. Once you got Eternity to show up, then the monsters started showing up and they'd start trying to attack the shrines or attack the levers up top that open to Oculus to let the light in. Once one of those shrines was broken, that was it. You were done. You got kicked out.
Yeah.
And so I've noticed over the years that you guys have started to move further away from failure conditions for questing. There, because you had Coil used to fail if he, got knocked out. And then there were some others. So I know some people would get frustrated because you'd be in there for 30 minutes, really close. One group can't handle what they got coming in, shrine breaks, and you're done. The good thing though is if that happened, you got your ethereal key back, so you could try again the next time that the dungeon opened. But yeah, so up on screen is the map that kind of shows how it was all broken down. You had the 4 quadrants down below. In the big areas is where the shrines were. Up top, right where like the red dots are, that was where the lever was. And you had to organize, because once you, if I remember correctly, there was no way to get out of the bottom part. I don't know if you could D-door out of there.
I I believe if you went downstairs, it was either not possible or very, very difficult to go back and forth between the two spaces, because I think this was during a time when, if you've played a lot of our more recent stuff, sometimes you'll get in like an end boss room and a gate or something will pop behind you, but now there'll be a clicky portal, right? The little
Mm-hmm.
swirly where you can click and then jump in. Back in the day, we didn't have that as much. If a gate came down behind you, sometimes you're locked out. And if I remember right, that one was built at a time when we were tending to do that lockout mechanism more often than we do today.
Yeah. And so once you're down there, it's like you're down there. And so if you don't have enough people covering levers, then you ran into some issues. Because if Eternity was in the room with no light, you're not damaging her.
Yeah.
But it was an interesting. So I have to ask, with 64-bit servers, will we ever see another 24-man dungeon?
I don't know is the honest answer. We're going to basically find out. We haven't yet had discussions around if we want to bring back bigger raids or not. Step one is just get all the status quo stuff working optimally before we go there. But I think it is possible because as we've been able to clean up more and more and more of the things that cause the inefficiencies, getting rid of that can open the gateway to going, okay, now what do we need to tune to make it play nice when you have above 12 people? Because I kind of miss that big group of people thing, right? Like even though there's like some logistical things to do with people when you have like these giant like raid groups, I do kind of miss the excitement of just there's so many people that you're just like, wow, there's a lot of people in here right now. And everybody kind of like had something that they're doing, and just I kind of miss that. And it's just will we ever be able to support that again? We'll see, we'll see.
Okay. So from everybody that I've talked to, and in Discord and game and on the forums, Mabar seems to be the original Mabar has like this sense of nostalgia for a lot of people, and they really enjoyed it. Ultimately, though, we know that the amount of lag that was coming from doing that resulted in it not being feasible to continue. But there were a couple other things that came out of it. We had the pumpkin and skullhead grenades. I never had an issue with them. I thought, okay, cool, they're fun. But man, some people got really bent out of shape about that. Which ultimately,
Yeah,
which
yeah.
which ultimately brought out the party pooper potion to remove that cosmetic from you. Um, I know for me and a lot of people, the pumpkin headed, beholders or the training dummies, or it's kind of that whole feel of, this is really cool. It's got the vibe for the season.
Yeah.
But I want to talk a little bit about what some people refer to as Maban. So there was an
Mm.
issue when the first iteration came out where a decent number of people ended up getting banned by playing Mabar. Can you talk a little bit about that? Because people still bring it up to this
Yeah,
day.
sure. So this was a case where we had this loophole that was letting people basically duplicate the scale, because that was the thing everybody wanted from playing Eternity. It wasn't just the fact that you were in this big, cool 24-person encounter. One of the rewards at the end of that was access to an ethereal dragon scale that was the only way to get it. Is you had to go fight
Mhm.
Eternity. And someone figured out a way to duplicate it. And we figured out why, and we had that code fix, and we're like, okay. And so then we were discussing, okay, do we want to take action on the people that had duplicated things and sort of, piled up way too many of these things? And at the time, they were like, okay, we'll go into our data logs. We'll see, we basically set a threshold and said anybody who has more than X number clearly was up to something. Like we weren't really interested in coming after somebody that like, oops, they did it like 2 or 3 times. We're really looking for like the exponentially, like just loaded out with like oodles and noodles, 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 noodles of stacks of hundreds of these things. So we run that data report. We kind of give it an eyeball, and I remember it. So at the time, I was working in community, and so we were looking through the list. And I remember at the time seeing some names that came through on that list where I was like, "Really, that person? Are you sure? That's one of our very well-behaved, polite, always nice players. I've seen them in many of our different social things, and never seen them doing anything bad. It's very unusual for them to show up on this list." And they're like, yeah, well, sometimes people are not who you think they are. And it's like, I guess. I mean, the data is there. I'm looking at it. It's straight from the database. I mean, the database is the database. So they go through and they apply the disciplinary action. And we also tried to scale it. Like if you were somebody where you didn't really have like a big history, we're like, we're not going to permanently boot you out. This is your slap on the wrist one time. But for the people that got that slap on the wrist, who had historically never had any issues before, they were like, what? Do anything? What are you talking about? So we all of a sudden got this wave of appeals, which we get appeals when you take disciplinary action. That's a normal thing. But as we're reviewing them, we're like, man, this is a very high number of appeals from people that we already were sort of like, why was this person on the list? It seems like very uncharacteristic of them. So we had to go back through the list. And then as we were looking, we're like, okay, maybe we're just not understanding the data that we're seeing here. So then we had to go and talk to the BI team to be like, we feel like something's not right here. Is it possible that we messed up a table join or something and we're not like getting the right data here? What is this? So they go and look at it. And what turned out was that the way that the data was recording, everyone assumed that it was showing us where each item was at the time that it was. But the way that that data recorded is people forgot that there's, ever notice how when you look in your bank, there's two kinds of bank, right? Three if you count the money aspect of it for like your shared bank. There's a shared bank that has your items. And then there's the crafting bank, right? And there's only certain things that can go in the crafting bank, right? It's because it's a different type of object. We have objects that are different based on whether they are sort of, how shall I describe it? Let's call them more consumable than other objects, right? And these consumable objects, when the game moves them from place to place, it doesn't actually move that. It isn't taking like if I have like, my, I don't know, my water here. If I move my water from here to here, it isn't actually moving my water. What it does is it deletes my water and creates a new water on the other side. And so in the data, what if somebody was moving their stuff around, like putting it in the bank, pulling it out of the bank, putting it on this character? No, never mind. Maybe I want it on that character. Okay, let me coalesce all my scales. And that sort of normal behavior was on our end in the data looking like somebody creating a whole bunch of these scales instead of just what you were actually seeing was the natural flow of people moving the stuff around throughout their inventory, putting it in a bag, taking it out of the bag, putting it in the inventory, taking it out of the inventory, putting it in the bank, taking it out of the bank, moving it from tab 1 to tab 2 in your inventory. Like it was very benign behavior. And if you're a very highly engaged player that's been playing this sucker a lot, you're going to have a lot more scales and be moving them around constantly. So once we figured that out, it was like, aha, I knew so-and-so would never do that. So then we could come back, lift off this unnecessary discipline off the people that hadn't done anything wrong, and then help them out essentially. But it was very, at the time, very confusing to us as well as players.
Yeah, because now that the way that you explain it makes a lot of sense, because I know that there's been other things in the game where when you're creating a new, like you're combining something to create something new, it actually doesn't like add to the existing item. It like destroys the old item and then creates a new item. If I remember right, it was some of the stuff with the Necropolis upgrades was along those lines as well. So makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because I've always wondered, so why did all these people get banned and then they didn't get banned? It's
Right.
interesting behind the scenes stuff that you guys get to hear first. All right.
Yeah.
So ultimately, the original Mabar Endless Night Festival ran from 2010 to 2013. You guys done a different types of mitigations to try to eliminate some of the performance issues, and ultimately, as we got close to the Mabar season in 2014, a lot of people were asking, so when's Mabar going to start? When's Mabar going to start? And in September of 2014, Cordovan, I'm going to read because his phrasing is interesting. So in September of 2014, Cordovan posted on the forums that the Endless Night Festival is not going to return because, quote, we have not been able to recover the Mabar Festival in a way that addresses the issues with it and allow for its return. So I know in 2014, I think we got an extra round of Crystal Cove at that time. And so that then there would be another event. You guys were working on another event for future seasons. So with that, how did you guys come up with the idea for Night Revels?
Yeah. So one of the not so secret things is both myself and Severilyn love Halloween. We were unwilling to yield the spooky season. And we're like, look, what is it about this event that's keeping us from bringing it back? Well, it's the fact that it's, so non-performant that it just chokes the whole game out. Because it wasn't even just that you would lag out inside of the actual raid. It was that any other server cluster that was sharing resources with where that thing was, the non-performant behavior would spill into those other server nodes as well. So we're like, we can't lag the entire game out, even if you're trying not to participate in the Mabar Festival by bringing Mabar back. So we're like, if the thing that's keeping us from bringing it back is the non-performance of it, what could we change to make it be performant? And so we would go back and forth, and we're like, well, there's two aspects to this. The fact that the dungeon, the raid itself is having these issues because it has so many people. And then a second problem was that the way that the graveyard was behaving was kind of vulnerable to similar problems as the raid. And when those two things were active, then it just choked everything. So we're like, well, what's something we can do that doesn't choke everything in that way? We're like, well, traditional quests. If we make them traditional quests, those seem to work. So we're like, okay, what if we take what was the big raid and if we tune it and make it more of a regular dungeon experience, could we do that and then let players work to unlock that? So they still get to fight the dragon. They still get that, they'll get some of the mechanics. It won't be the 24-person version, but at least it's something, right? So that was step one. Step two, we look at the graveyard and we're like, what if we just make a private instance of the graveyard? What if we actually turn the graveyard into an instance instead of cheating it using public area? Now, this is something that we hadn't been able to do, just to be clear, in days of yore when Mabar was first brought around. It was very difficult for us to recreate a public area because in order to recreate a public area or even to recreate the same space from an existing dungeon, the quest maker would have to make it by hand. They'd have to look at what was over here and then diligently be like copy pastaing every single asset, every single whatever. Like you're literally creating it from whole cloth. And when you have to do that, you kind of go, well, do I want to take all this time to copy a thing that they've already seen, or do I want to invest that effort into making somewhere new that they haven't seen? And so we'd always had this big debate on the team about the fact that we're like, hey, why can't we have them go to the marketplace as a quest? Or why can't we have them do a cool fight in the public area of Cannith or this and that? Like, can't we just recreate that in a quest? And it's like, well, yeah, we can, but it's, somebody has to rebuild it. Well, at a certain point along the way, I want to say it was like 2013. I can't exactly remember. I just know that there was a point in time where we got a new tool for the quest makers. And what that tool let the quest makers do was take an existing area and copy it. And that unlocked the ability to do a lot of different stuff. Number one, it let us do things like take existing public spaces, clone them, refine them for the needs of the quest. But that's what lets you get those quests, like when you're running on the roofs of the marketplace, for example, right? That's because we finally got a tool that let us copy the marketplace over, or it let us recreate the tent explosion event for everybody that missed it back when it first came out. Now we could run Chronoscope and copy that whole space, let them see what it was like. And so what that meant was now we could copy the graveyard and make an instance version of the graveyard. Because there were other things about having the big public graveyard that were kind of funky, which was you would get in scenarios where you kind of had to cross your fingers and hope that everybody was playing nice. Because you would sometimes end up with like a high level person sort of coming in the zone and a low level person. And then it had some mechanics to try to keep you from basically getting in a place where one person was interfering with the other person's stuff. But it was like at a certain point when there's so many people in the public area at once, you're trying to find a corner where there's not a wrong level person too close to you. And so we're like, if we instance this, that'll solve that problem too, because then the person can just choose what level band they're going into based on what level they are. And that'll also let us take the scaling stuff. Because that was the other thing. The public area had this mechanic where whoever walked up to the spawning node based on what level they were is what kind of creatures would pop out. And so if the higher level or the lower level person got there before you, well, now this monster pod is too high or too low level for you. I better go wander around and try to trigger a different one. Being able to let people go in at the level that they are to get stuff that is relevant to their level was just an added benefit that we're like, that's just going to be a better experience. So then the last piece was we're like, well, we got the raid cranked down to a 6-person encounter. We've got the graveyard turned into a real quest, which lets us maybe get rid of some artifacts for performance reasons and some other gameplay fun stuff. But is that going to be enough? Is that going to be like, I just go in the graveyard and then I go in the dragon and then I go back and forth between those two things? Is that going to be fun enough? So then we got the idea, because again, we had this copy content tool. We're like, what if we spookify one of the existing quests? We copy it, we rip out the guts of it, and then we replace it with thematically spooky themed things. And one of the added benefits of doing this was it let us use it as a training tool for brand new quest makers. So when we would get a brand new quest person on the team, one of the first tasks we give them, besides looking for typos, is make a night Revels dungeon. And so over the years, that's why we keep having like lots of these different dungeons sort of slowly coming in. It's every time we've had new people in the team or interns or whoever, we're like, spookify a dungeon, because the dungeon has the more or less base mechanics, so they can't really hurt anything, right? Because all the hard work has been done. The cell has been built out. A lot of the scripting has been done on where different generators are going to show up. And all they have to do is go in and tune the dialogues, go in and tune the deco, place some spooky things, maybe change up some stuff about it depending on how advanced of a quest designer they are at that phase in their time on the team. But it's a really good kind of quest making training wheels experience. And so then on the other side of it, what the player gets out of it is the other thing we wanted the festival to start to feel more like normal DDO gameplay. One of the things we had started to dislike about some of our older festivals was we kind of had this thought process around people spend a lot of effort and investment on their character builds and their character, right? You've got this character that you've put all your heart and soul into. But at the end of the day, if the way to beat a piece of DDO content is to not bother using that character at all, and you're just kind of using your real world brain or your real world Twitch skill, what was the point of building your character? So we wanted you to have a Night Revels experience that was really centered around using your character in the way that you built that character to be used, which is going in dungeons, fighting dungeon encounters, dealing with things in that way, as opposed to having the interlude of, like, let's take Rezia Ice Games, for example. Rezia Ice Games, even though it was kind of a neat interlude, because you had this weird mechanic where you're going down the ice slide and trying to get the coins up in the air, but any build could do that. It didn't matter whether you were capped level, it didn't matter if you were level 1, it didn't even matter what gear you were wearing other than maybe something to help boost you a little bit on your jump. For the most part, you really didn't need any particular kind of build to collect ice coins. You just needed to invest the time to learn where to aim
Mm.
yourself to get them. And so we kind of wanted to move away from that, and we wanted it to be more about taking your character into a spooky environment, but doing the stuff that you do best in DDO using your build.
So, um, so initially in 2015, when Night Revels was introduced, we still had the quote unquote public area in Delaras, and the 4 quests were spaced out around the area. And so the original 4, if all my info is correct, was Under New Ravagement, Haverdashed, Snitch and the Lich, and Kobold's Newest Ringleader. And all 4 of those are short, simple dungeons. I could see where you could use those as a training tool for new folks. It's not anything long and elaborate. Do you give them an option of what quest they want to do, or do you assign them a quest to make?
It kind of depends on the quest maker, because some quest makers are people who have been in the company and maybe they've switched over to the DDO team, but they play DDO additionally, and they've always wanted to spookify this one dungeon. So sometimes we get team members who are like, I've always wanted to turn this one spooky. I have a whole idea for it. Let me go. And other people don't have that already. And we're like, look, we kind of have a list of quests that if you're looking for one to spookify, try one of these, see if any of these work for you. So it's kind of dependent on the designer.
So that was the initial. So you would still go into almost like the public area of Delaras. You'd still kill things, and then you would get keys that would let you go into those dungeons, because those fiery entry points were just spaced out around the dungeon, which was interesting. And I know there's a few people who still really like that. I want to go into this big area with my friends and not necessarily do a quest, but just kill things and collect stuff. But 2016, we got 2 new dungeons. It was Getting Ahead in Lord's March Plaza and Hayward Foundry. So a little bit longer quests than we had. And then in 2017, I think we got the longest quest that we had of all of them, which was Resurrection Chamber. So somebody decided that it was a great idea to redo Coalescence Chamber, which is a quest that I've never really enjoyed because my halfling always bounced off the walls when I jumped. And that was also when they raised the, added new items and stuff to up to level 28. 2018 was when we got the crypt area. And so it sounds like that it really was more of how can we make it so that it's a little bit more isolated. I guess that's how you would describe it, because with the public area, from what it sounds like, when you had bleed over of performance issues, if you can isolate them to a more specific area, like an instance, then it sounds like it's less impact on the overall performance of the servers.
Right. And there's also something to be said for building a new, more tightly controlled space that doesn't have all of the historical bits associated with it. So Polaris, since it has existed since basically the game started, that means any quest designer.
You went robotic.
All right, let me give it a sec, see if it'll catch up.
Okay.
What about now? Better?
No, it's still there.
Oh, it's still better. Let me get more closer.
No, still getting the robotic.
All right. Let me pop out and
Okay.
I'll pop right back in.
Yeah.
All right, how about now?
Good.
All right,
Gotcha.
there we go.
Thank you.
Sorry, lost my train of thought there. We were talking about so when you have a space like Delaras that has existed since basically, I think Delaras was built even before, like we're talking like alpha DDO, if I remember right. It's been there for so long and had so many hands touch it that if any two people did something by mistake that interacted improperly with each other's changes, you're sort of taking all of that baggage into the space when you have the public area. When you can build a room from scratch and you're the only person that has touched that room and there's nothing else in there besides what you've made, it's much easier to isolate problems because you don't have, oh, there's this one occluder sitting in one part of the dungeon that I don't know why it was put there, but it's not playing nice with this piece of decoration fence that's touching it. And you clear up a lot of that kind of mystery. So that was a part of it, was having the sort of crypt space with the doorways meant that we could make a space that we knew is following all of our best practices about, lighting and positioning and everything else. And it's a much smaller physical footprint in terms of if you have to go in and investigate it, you're not having to crawl through tons of land blocks to comb around and look for what could be going wrong. You've just got this much space to try to figure out what's going wrong. So there was a lot of advantages to making it be its own space that was not based on very ancient, by DDO time measure, very
Right.
ancient DDO public space.
So, but it's it seems to work. I like the crypt area. I know there was one point you guys had like separated out the levels for entrance into the Tolero's public area. So I think prior to having the crypt area, you had the ability to go in at a specific level range to go in and kill things, which it was nice as long as all your buddies had, around the same level range, and most people are when they go in. But we had a few other quests added over time. We got Framework, we got Eternity Unleashed in 2018, Smashing Pumpkins, and the other interesting thing is some of the time when you started adding more dungeons, you rotate some out. Yep. Is there a reason why you rotate out dungeons when you put a new one in? Is it just to keep it at a total of 8?
So some of it is about how many do we have active at once, but a lot of it is about just kind of changing it up. Like it's kind of nice to have one year you go in and you're like, oh, there's something different here this time. Or maybe you're somebody that didn't play at the year that, Kobold's New Ringleader was there. You weren't there. So it's new to you when it shows back up. So we kind of liked the idea of mixing it up a little bit so that it's not always the exact same ones every single time. Because that's also kind of part of that over time, it just makes it feel a little different. It's not just the same old every single time. And then also you get to kind of learn which ones are people's favorites, because if you take a particular one and you turn it off and they're like, no, not that one. And it's like, oh, people really like that one. Good to know.
It looks like Haverdashed is always the victim.
Yeah.
It seems to be the one that gets taken out. It's probably also the shortest of all of the ones.
Short, yeah. Haverdash is tricky because there's not, unlike a lot of the other ones, it doesn't have a lot of substance to it compared to some of the other ones. So we're like, it's so short. Now we might be able to sort of, maybe we'll do Haverdash Erd and we'll punch a hole in the wall and extend more about what Haverdasher's up to. But in its current form, it's so short.
We also haven't had Resurrection Chamber since 21. Mm-hmm. Any thought? Because I remember seeing something on the forum. Somebody said, "Are you guys going to bring Resurrection Chamber back at any time?"
Resurrection Chamber is kind of getting looked at. One of the things we ran into with Resurrection Chamber is that we wanted one of the other things we get besides the ability for newer quest designers to kind of take a stab at their first dungeon efforts in sort of a safe, harmless place. It's also an opportunity for us to go back and take, if there's a quest that we kind of feel like either needs refreshed or maybe it's got some mechanics problems that we're not that fond of, it lets us kill two birds with one stone because we can go back, try to address the gameplay aspects of that dungeon while we spookify it, because we'll basically retroactively go back in and change the normal version of the dungeon while we're in there fixing problems in the new dungeon. Coalescence Chamber has always been a very polarizing dungeon because it's a lot of number one, it's very easy to get turned around in there because you sort of, it's almost like the
It's like,
cave version of the pit.
right.
It's like two big shafts, and there's certain points that you need to be crossing over, and you're going up and down. And there can be a couple of encounters where if you miss one stupid bat, you got to figure out where you missed the stupid bat and go all the way back and look for it. And so, and there's also, like you say, you jump the wrong way, you fall all the way down the shaft. You're trying to use the air jets to get yourself back up. It's a very challenging dungeon as dungeons go. And so the thought at the time was, well, we'll spookify some stuff, and this will be an opportunity for us to make a few more little adjustments to try to ease up the things that are painful about that quest. And I don't know that any of us felt like we still hit it. Like, I don't think it quite made it there yet. So that'll be one that, if it comes back, it'll be after we kind of think about some different ways of addressing the stuff that makes it. There's like a line of frustration in DDO. We don't want
Mhm.
everything to be a cakewalk, but we also don't want you to be like breaking your keyboard over your knee. so, so that one's not quite back over the keyboard breaking line just yet.
Gotcha. So at some point we introduce Mabar shadows to the dungeons. Easy way to get keys. I really enjoyed that aspect, so I don't have to grind the Tolero dungeon constantly to get keys. And then over the last couple years, it's been mostly with the level changes. We raised the level. You guys introduced some new gear in 22. I know some people were really hoping that we would have new gear for 24 with the level cap increase, but I know you guys have other things that you got in the thing. But we did get a new quest. And I want to talk a little bit about the new quest because I had not seen anybody run it preview or anything else. So when I went in there and I started talking, I'm like, okay, shop till you drop. What is going on here? And I'm like, oh no, they didn't. They did. They made a Spirit Halloween quest. Whose brainchild was that?
That's all me. 100% me. Well, what I should say is my direction to them as the producer was, I need you to get me a nod to a very well-known Halloween superstore. We all know which one I'm talking about. I don't care how you accomplish it, but that's your objective, friends. You need to somehow drop this reference in there. And obviously, we had to come up with the name, right? We're like, okay, so then clearly it's Spectre Night Revels Superstore, right? But that was the assignment. It was like, I don't care which quest you spookify to do it, but this is your homework, is how do we drop this reference in here?
Because now the most recent news is they're getting into Christmas.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that doesn't surprise me. Oh, so what you're saying is now I have to make the festival superstore.
I guess so. That'd be an interesting, add that to Snow Peaks. That'd be an interesting thing to do. I think one of the things with new that's been introduced, I think a lot of people really enjoy the Reaper Steed and Reaper cosmetics. I know last year especially, I ran everything so much that I was like tired of Night Revels by the time I was done. But getting that Reaper Steed and all that other fun stuff. Night Revels and Mabar to me are still some of the best events that you guys have done. And I think overall the community as a whole thinks the same way. I did a few weeks ago, I did throw a poll up on the forums just for the heck of it. And I think out of all the respondents, about over 75% said that Mabar Night Revels was the best DDO event.
Nice.
So
what was the runner-up?
I would actually have to go back and look. I didn't list everything. I tried to think of as much as I could. Some people brought up things like the marketplace invasion. Some people brought up Mimic Hunt. There were some that I just missed. Some, if I had put it on there, I think hardcore probably would have been second. I think that is something that a lot of people just really enjoy. But Mabar far and away with the ones, that I've seen that I had listed. That was the one that most people had selected. So we're getting a little bit towards the end here. I had what Can we expect new festivals in the near future?
We talk about that internally. One of my big things that I feel like we're kind of missing is I feel like we don't really have a good thing slotted in the springtime area. Like, yeah, we have the anniversary, but I kind of don't count the anniversary as a festival because it's like DDO's birthday is a fact as opposed to a seasonal thing. So I feel like we could we've talked about whether we want to take another crack at redoing the egg hunt.
Mm-hmm.
It would be in a different way, but that's one that we've sort of talked about. We've also talked about whether we want to expand out of Winter Olympic style nods into Summer Olympic style nods. So no specifics to announce there, but right now Crystal Cove ends up kind of falling very heavily into the summer because it is pirates and
Mm-hmm.
it seems to have a pretty good fit in summer. Plus with Talk Like a Pirate Day, but we've talked about, why does winter have to be the only thing that has multiple nods, right? Are there other seasons where we can have more than one thing happening? Because people like the change up.
Um, yeah. So the Festival of the Traveler was one that I was like, I haven't seen that
Yeah.
in a while.
Yep.
I have to ask because this is something that I've seen show up on the forums every once in a while. But what happened to the Degenev brothers, and will they
Mm.
ever come back?
The Jenner brothers are on my list. They're a case of that was one of our earliest attempts at how do I want to define this? Because we never really had a term for it internally. Um, the ambient, quick hit public area change up. So a good example of that is when you go into the marketplace, every once in a while, a dragon lands over
Mm-hmm.
by the bank, right? And that's part of the story of them all talking about giant hold stuff. Back in the day, like way back in the day, there would be a very rare chance you'd look in the sky and see Vela swoop through the sky every once in a while. When you go into House Fjarlin in the amphitheater, every so often the play runs that teaches you about the truthful one, and that's not just always on; it runs every so often. Degenev are sort of they were our first attempt at that kind of like we want this thing to be here that's sort of happening intermittently. It's like this really baby experience of just a little bit of a change up. You would go and watch. You could either watch their cool spell effects show, or if you weren't in the mood to watch the show, you had this temporary timer where you could run around and try to find all of the succubuses that were hidden around the marketplace. And then your reward for doing that was just a little buff, right? This little buff only lasted for a little while. And one of the things we found is that it was neat, but people didn't seem to really engage with it that much. And so we were like, do we want to keep putting more of these kinds of things in, or do we, and we used to announce it right when we'd say, hey, the thing is running. People would come and look for it, but then kind of feel a little underwhelmed because at this point they had gotten used to events like
Right.
Razia or the Night Revels or this other stuff. So you'd say Degenerate Brothers are back, and people are like, that's it. So, and there's also a few things that we're a little about, like we're like, I don't know if there's any performance problems in this puppy, but the way to make sure that there's none is to just not run it until we get the actual time to go in and mess with it. And so since the payout to the player was so low, because like I said, you're only getting this cute little temporary buff. We're like, do we want to invest the research to go in and carve it apart and make sure it doesn't have perf problems, or are we just better off just kind of keeping it off until we're absolutely positive? And so it's always been a case of the Degenerate brothers they're there, but we're just when we weigh them against other stuff that players have to play with or that we have work to do on, they just keep kind of falling down the list. But now if we get like a huge surge of people being like, no, I loved being able to talk to the guys and seeing the cool magic show and doing the things. Okay, all right, then we'll talk. But I haven't heard that clamoring. The Jenna brothers have been more of this like people go, oh yeah, I kind of remember that, and I need them to be stronger if I'm going to invest the effort into tuning them.
The visual effects still show up in the
Yeah,
marketplace. And I think that for me, it's like a trigger. It's like every time I see those, I'm like, ooh, they're here. So I run over and I check, and I'm always disappointed because they're not there. I can't
yeah,
give them any money.
yeah,
Um,
yeah.
so um, the other event, well, somebody mentioned Mimic event. I remember way back when we had a Mimic event where we got the collectible cards.
Mm-hmm.
I still have the collectible cards. So I don't know what Mimic event they're referring to, if they're just talking about Mimic Hunt or
Yeah, the current Mimic Hunt versus the original version when it came out with the cards. The current Mimic Hunt is definitely something we still run intermittently. We kind of liked the idea that mimics are sort of that classic D&D thing. Like you go to a chest and you're like, is it gonna get me? I don't know. Exactly. So and we also liked that we could sort of let people have a way to sort of opt out if they didn't want to be hunted by extra mimics. I mean, there's
Mhm.
obviously still mimics elsewhere in the game, but if you kind of wanted to be like, yeah, no thanks. So that's one of the things we've always tried to balance with events is we want people to opt in as opposed to having an event land on their lap that they're not really having fun with and then they don't really have a great way to get away from it. We really want people to participate in events because they want to. And the mimic hunt was sort of that edge case where it was like,
Right.
well, the whole point of mimics is that they ambush you.
Yeah. And that was that hardcore season. It was get close to the chest, hit interact, and tumble backwards twice.
Yeah,
Every
yeah.
single time. Midwinter races out in Evening Star. That is another one that I know people enjoyed. I enjoyed that more than the Rizzy Ice games. Because it was fun doing the races. Any chances we will ever see that come back?
That's on my radar of do I have a way with the cloning tech to try to take what was good about that event and clone it into an instance? That seems to usually be the secret for us with a lot of these events that existed in the public areas that for one reason or another from a performance perspective that's just not working. Pulling them into a instanced space seems to predominantly help. So that one is on my list because, like you say, it was really fun, and we have the two other ice themed challenges, right? You have the climbing one in Snow
Mhm.
Peaks, and you have the slide in Snow Peaks. But the slide in Snow Peaks is a little different than the racetrack, and I feel like that is another one that's ripe to sort of reharvest and repurpose because it was neat. It was fun and it was neat and it was interesting.
All right. Was there anything else about Mabar? Any other secret behind the scenes stuff you could tell us about either Mabar or Night Revels that people might be interested in knowing about?
Let me think. So, I can tell you about the pumpkinification of the game. One of the things that happened with that was that wasn't originally in the design. A particular quest maker had basically a little bit of prototyping time, and they figured out that they could apply the effect in certain ways. And they're like, I could make beholders be pumpkins. I could slap pumpkins on the heads of the training dummies. And, do we want to try this? And it was like, you know what? Let's try it. And if everybody hates it, then we just won't do it anymore. But if they like it, then we'll keep doing it. And so far, overwhelmingly, people like it. They like the festive feel. They think it's fun when they see a beholder show up as a giant sort of pumpkin that's fighting them. They're like, ah, fun, seasonal, great. Another thing that people might not realize is how much we've been able to leverage the technology that allowed us to create the Reaper system and the champions. That same tech allowed us to do a lot of the other types of festivals that we've had, such as when you see, the winter champions, or you see the night revels champions. A lot of the times that we're able to do hardcore, like that technology allowed us to bring mechanics change ups into dungeons in a very broad systemic way that in the past we would never have been able to do. Like if we wanted to do something fun, throughout every dungeon in the game, just wasn't going to happen unless somebody manually went in every single dungeon and placed it. And since DDO has existed for so long, we have such a breadth of content that makes that very prohibitive. But with the Reaper tech, we're able to go in and do these sort of interesting changes. So we've been continuing to leverage that for many other interesting festival and event type activities.
All right. Well, that pretty much was everything that I had. So I appreciate all of the info. It's been great. It went way longer than I thought we were going to go, but that
That's
is
fine.
perfectly fine. Great information. If you're cool with it, we could probably open up questions to chat for about 15 minutes or so.
Sure.
And see if they have any questions, because I'm sure there's some. All right. So if
Yeah,
you
sure.
guys, let me scroll back and see if there's anything. Troggy Trog says they should redo Eternity Unleashed and make it about a dragon mama and her hatchling brood. Maternity Unleashed.
Ooh. Oh, you know what that you know who would be all over that is Knockback, our one of our lead quest designers. We love to keep I don't know if anybody noticed this about Night Revels, but over the years we would have Night Revels, Return of the Night Revels. Like we kept naming it after
Right.
the sort of old school horror movie vibes where it's like, son of the such and such, right? Like, son of Frankenstein, bride of Dracula. So there you go, son of or daughter of eternity. That's a vibe we could definitely try for.
All right. Let me see. All right. Druid's Fire says you can make a summer version of Tower of Frost and get Cordo to revoice all the lines. You can have Bride of the Egg Hunt.
Oh.
So Dawn's Early Light asked, is anybody working on updating old loot tables like Sharn Syndicate, Waterworks, Shanticore, Tangleroot, etc.?
We've talked about the older loot because some of that loot was made for there's been a couple of things like this. Same with quests. Over time, when you've existed as long as we have, there's certain things that are they were good in the time and in the builds and in the game mechanics for their time, but then over time we're like, well, now nobody's really interested in this type of thing. Usually named items fall prey to that more so than the randomized loot because they're tuned for their time. So it's on our list. It's not at the top of the pile, but it is in there somewhere in the middle. It is making sure that some of that older stuff is still because since people are TRing, they are constantly replaying that older stuff. That's one of the big differences for DDO compared to a lot of other games. Is a lot of games people sort of play through and kind of get to the end,
Mm-hmm.
but with us, everybody's revisiting
Right.
tons of quests that they otherwise wouldn't. They might see them hundreds of times because they're doing their TR loops. So we want to make sure that that content is still enjoyable to do. The other day we had a dungeon we were looking at and we were like, oh, why is this fight set up this way? Like this, all the payout is just a regular random chest. Why is this fight so hard in this one dungeon? And it's because at the time that dungeon was kind of the end
Right.
game. And it's like, well, now it's like one of the quests that you sort of play on your way to other things. Do we really need it to be working in this way? So we do get the opportunities to revisit some of that older stuff, and we sort of have a punch list of things that we're like, someday, the next time we're looking to revamp something, or the next time we need a new quest designer to focus on an older piece of content, have them look at this one.
So my wife just informed me she wants a sentient jewel that sounds like Vincent Price.
So we've been talking about sentient personalities for Night Revels, and we're like, who can we get? Um, one of the ones that we've talked about was getting a horror one where it doesn't actually talk to you; it just makes like the cha 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 cha. So we have all kinds of ideas of different sentient personalities that we want to explore.
Somebody did say Creature from the Black Lock. That would be an interesting
Oh,
one.
I like that. That is good. All right, I gotta take a note on that.
H46 Aviator asks, any ETA on updated Cannith crafting to level 34? And any big changes to Crystal Cove coming?
I know that Steel Star is looking at Kenneth. It won't be this year. I can tell you that. But that is on our list because as the level cap, as that increases, we have to kind of go back and kind of look at the overall picture of what treasure people have to go after. So that one's in our list of things that we're looking at. And then in terms of the Cove, what one of the things we've been doing on the 64-bit previews where we're looking at the new server was we specifically turned on the Cove over there just to see how is it behaving, how is its performance. It actually did really good. I was very, very pleased. So we've talked about, do we want to go in and revamp the Cove at some point? For the most part, the mechanics of the miners, like all of that, I don't expect us to change that much because they're pretty solid. Like everybody understands what to do. It's behaving the way we want it to. It's not doing anything problematic. And it's interesting, and it's a different sort of gameplay than you get elsewhere, other than challenges. But it's more for us about revisiting. Do we want to change anything about the way that the outside area of the cove is working? And so that one is on our list to sort of, do we want to sort of give it the treatment that we gave to Mabar in terms of pulling some of that stuff in a different way?
Let me see what else we got. Troggy Trogass says, I'd love to see more reasons to go for optionals or rares in dungeons and even wilderness too. Like more XP named loot drops for those. Maybe extra monster manual bonuses for those rare names.
We are looking at ways to make optionals be enticing, because we love optionals. They're sort of like the extra special sauce of, yeah, sure, you can follow the critical path and finish the dungeon. But, what about this side wing, or what happens if I get that door open? That to us is like the real D&D feel, where you see this sort of thing on the side and you're like, ooh, do I want to mess with that? So we've had Flimsy Firewood's been doing some prototyping work on ways to see if we can maybe do some interesting things. And we've also been talking a lot about the way that the landscapes, the adventure areas work, because people love to go through them. There's obviously benefits to hunting stuff and finding the journals and different things, but we really want the landscapes to feel like you want to go to them as much as you do the dungeons. And right now we still quite I don't feel like we've really hit that level yet. I feel like a lot of people, for them, the adventure area is sort of the space in between them and the dungeon. And I want it to be more like, no, no, I look forward to going into this adventure area and then going to my dungeon. We tried a little bit of that with Dread, where we had like the purple named bosses, where it was an option for you if you were somebody that just wasn't going to be able to handle getting into the raid and figuring all those mechanics out. We're like, well, you know what? If you want to throw down on this really hard but not always available boss, try that. See if people kind of liked that. That was a little bit more of the beer and pretzels raid kind of feel. Um, but again, since it's a landscape, it only lets you have 6 people. So we're still kind of looking at things like that. I'm very excited for the idea of having more interesting stuff happening in landscapes. We are, at least with the new lantern event that we let people preview this past week. This is our first time allowing the event to kind of go into the adventure areas in that way. In the past, we've always really focused them inside the dungeons, and this time we're like, no, 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 no. Let's see what happens if we let people have them also in the adventure areas. So that'll be very different. And I'm hoping what that'll do is, as you're going through an adventure area and you're like, oh, hold on, one of the rare things just spawned here. Let me go check that out. So I'm very eager to see how people engage with the lantern event, because we're trying to do something a little different with it. So it's not just, oh, a boss spawned, we fight the boss. We're trying to do some change ups in there, and I'll be very curious to see what people think about them.
So on that note, Druid's Fire was curious about, on a high level, how did the second Cormier test go with the Lanterns event active?
So second Cormier test went really good. We got people doing what we wanted them to do. Our big area that we were, I'll say, focused on is that very first sort of introduction experience, because that introduction experience is very different than what we have typically done with events, like very different. Because it's really kind of a heavy story wrapper. And so we'll see if people like it, and if there's anything we need to tune there, then we can tune. But I'm expecting it's going to be quite a bit different than what people are used to. Whereas I'm much more confident that the lanterns are going to allow us to do something that we haven't been able to do up to this point, which is let the people who love that hardcore experience be able to hang out with people that don't want hardcore, for those people to be able to play together. Because that was kind of the downside of hardcore, was that if you weren't somebody, and I'll admit I am not a hardcore person. Permadeath stresses me out way too much, so I like can't handle it. but my spouse loves it. And so you end up with these nights where he would go to play hardcore and then we don't get to play together because he's off doing hardcore and I'm not. So now we can play together. I can happily be doing my non-death lantern while he's working with his death lantern. It's obviously not a pure hardcore experience if we're playing together because I could like try to heal him. But at the very least, now if we want to play together, we can. So it should be interesting.
So one of
And the performance has been excellent on
that
Cormier, so that's also something we're very pleased by.
cool. Um, one of the things that I've seen, one of the I don't even want to call it a criticism. It's more of a, some people think that filling up the lanterns is going to take an extremely long amount of time. I haven't done it myself. I wasn't over there, but some people who are in like heavily invested in hardcore are like, yeah, this is going to be a real slog. Are you guys looking at things like that, like feedback from people who think that, maybe you don't quite get enough to repair the lantern when you do X?
Mhm. So that's something that Torque's looking closely at because he took his best stab at what we were trying to do was translate the effort that people put into a typical hardcore season and sort of backwards engineer that and translate it into lantern filling. So our goal that we're trying to hit is that you're spending a similar type of effort for a similar amount of time that you would spend on a hardcore season. That's the goal. And whether the specific numbers we've chosen get us to that level is something that's going to probably have to be massaged essentially. But the goal is if you've experienced a hardcore season and the amount of time it takes you to, get to your cloak or get to your mount or get to your pet. That's kind of what each lantern is trying to emulate is that amount of effort.
And unless you're Strim Tom and you're going from 1 to 20 in 11 hours. um
Yeah, yeah.
so Troggy Trog is asking a question on behalf of Voodoo because he's probably busy with family today. Are we going to see hydras besides just in the new 64-bit server lantern event?
Eventually.
That was one of the monsters you guys had made for PAX, right?
Yep. Yep. Turns out hydras are extremely complicated. It's one of our more complicated monsters. I'm excited though because if I can get hydras, that's the gateway to me getting other cool monsters, other cool multi-appendage things.
Another question about are there still plans to make a Reaper point system more linear, standardized, and share power with new players? Something that Severlin had talked about previously.
I don't have new updates on that, at least not today.
Okay. Go back through here. So Troggy was asking, what is the Lanterns event's time limit? How long is it going to go?
We're planning to run it about the standard length of a hardcore season. It might run like slightly longer, but not that much longer. But that's the goal. Is it's sort of like it runs that season, and the only major difference is the fact that unlike a hardcore seasons had that phase where you would be transferring off, and then we turn the server off. This server is intended to be permanent. So once we sort of are we do our season of lanternness, after that the server stays. So that's sort of the dependency on when we shut off the end of the lantern is we're still estimating when do we want to transition from lantern to standard server essentially. But the goal is about the length of a typical hardcore season.
So Dawn's Early Light has a good. This is an interesting comment. So there's a big difference. On hardcore, you're working on all the goals at once: favor, level, Reaper, but you only can work on one lantern at a time.
Correct, and that's one of the things that Torque is looking at. For example, one of the things that he's already looking at changing. I don't know if he has mentioned this to anybody yet, but if he hasn't, then I will describe it. Originally, you were supposed to carry your lantern in your trinket slot, and at this point, we're looking at the feedback and we're like, yeah, no, let's see if we can move this into a cosmetic slot instead. because that was one of the early bits that people had was like, oh my God, do I have to give up my trinket slot for this? So that's one example. But that dynamic of, oh, I can't both try to get my 20 goalpost and get my Reaper goalpost simultaneously. They're running on separate tracks. That's kind of what I mean about tuning the numbers. Like because he's emulating hardcore, there can be nuances that we have to still massage, just because of the different way that it's working.
Okay. All right. Did anybody have any more questions? Because if not, I'm going to let Tolero go because it's getting late there and it's almost breakfast time for me.
Nice.
It's the big difference being on opposite sides of the country.
Yeah. Now it's almost time for me to start my night Revels soup. So.
All right. Well, I don't see any more questions. So, Tolero, thank you so much for spending time with me today. Hour and a half is longer than I expected, but I do appreciate all the feedback. It's one of those things, a lot of people don't get to hear about the history of all these different things that we got going on. But I really do appreciate you taking time out of your weekend to talk story with me.
No problem. Thanks for having me.
Yep.
It was great chatting.
Yep. Thank you so much. All right. I think I'm going to go play some Night Revels myself for the last half hour I got to stream. And then we'll call it good.
All right. Take
Thank
care.
you. All right. Give me 1 second. Let me flip over to here. Okay, can you guys hear me now? Because I forgot to add in my my microphone. All right. So yeah, I understand the I understand the issue. I was able to talk with Tolero prior to the stream a little bit about the lag issues. I could tell you guys that they are knee deep in trying to figure all that stuff out because they understand how difficult it is and all of that. I've experienced it. It's frustrating. I get it. And so I'm really hoping that I'm hopeful with the new technology that they have that they're able to do some deeper dives and figure out exactly what's wrong. They could pinpoint specific things and kind of make it where those things aren't such a big deal. But it's one of those things. They will get it figured out. I know it's rough now for some people, especially those like on Orion, Argo, Sarlona. Being on Cannith, it's not so bad because we don't have quite as much of an issue. But it is what it is until they can get some of that sorted. I'm hoping they can. But I appreciate Tolero taking some time out of her Sunday to kind of go through all that Night Revels history with me. Because it's something that we don't always talk about. We don't talk about the history of the game. And you guys know when you guys watch me do these streams, I like doing like the I like going into doing like last week when I did Invitation to Dinner. How many nooks and crannies did I go into with Invitation to Dinner? A lot. I spent over an hour in there doing all the optionals and everything. And I think it's good. that we get to see kind of where the game was and how it's evolved over time. So, all right, I am going to flip over. I realized that I didn't add my microphone to this other scene, so I'm going to do that, and my game capture or game audio as well. So give me just 1 minute while I flip over there. Okay, you guys should be able to hear me. You guys might not be able to hear the game simply because I cannot get my game sound to work. My game sound on the stream, but yeah, Aviator, I agree. There's the fact that they're able to get to such a granular level is impressive. You know, that they can go in there and just find out that, okay, these specific creatures, these specific hirelings are having issues with this, and how do we address that? You know, it's really interesting how they can just go in and like solve that stuff. I'm 32, so I go in on 37. But yes, I have noticed the mobs just not working. And I was noticing it when I was running Night Revels on Friday with Zealotry. That it was really hard to identify. It's like we're doing under Kobold's newest ringleader. And as we're doing Kobold's newest ringleader, we went into that first room with all the things, and you end up with a whole bunch of kobolds just standing around not doing anything. Oh, I got everything on me. We need keys. I do not mean to heal him. Yeah. So yeah, that's what I've heard. I don't know if it's population size. There's all kinds of anecdotal evidence, right? The larger populated servers have more lag. So Troggy, that's almost like going back to the original Mabar days when we would lag like that with the dragon. Okay, see, these guys went brain dead. How long did it take them to respond to me? I mean, I'm hitting them. Yeah, Troggy, I totally get it. I totally get it. I tried Elder Scrolls. I just didn't enjoy it. I tried Neverwinter. I didn't enjoy it. Ultimately, I just came back. You know, I'm really hoping that they can figure out some of these lag issues. The fact that I have hope, because even though they turned off They turned off Darling and Owlbear. They've turned off. They closed Ogma's Song. They closed Party Crashers. Right. So those are all quests that have been closed, and stuff that has just kind of been shut off for right now. Past it. I'm so used to seeing column here, I completely missed my turn. Okay. Remove curse. Remove disease. Heal. Oh, this one's the Spectre. Okay. Yeah, but I'm hoping they can get the stuff figured out, because I feel for you guys. I do. My big gripe with DDO right now is the server that I play on is not well populated. You know, that's one of the things that I constantly struggle with. It's like, you guys have seen me when I stream at night on like Wednesdays or Fridays. We got like 50 people on. And good luck finding enough people in my level range. Yeah, each server has its unique things that it's struggling with. Kenneth is struggling with population. Orion, Sarlona, Argo, right now struggling with lag. I just think that if they can get the mega servers up and running, I think that would be great. Because if they get those going, then that opens up all kinds of possibilities. But I think some of the things that Tolero talked about today were really interesting in terms of some of the behind the scenes stuff. She talked about the issues that they found with the lag in the original Mabar event. Those things still occur, right? Because we're talking, this is an 18-year-old game. The coding practices that they had, the coding stuff practices that they had back in the day were different than what they have now. They have found more efficient ways of doing things. You know, and as they get more technology, like she talked about the technology with the Reapers, right? And that allowed them to introduce things like champions, where they can introduce things across the board. So they're making an investment. I mean, the fact that they're investing in 64-bit servers, you know, they're making an investment in the game for long-term health. And you got to remember, this is a small company. When I say small, I mean relatively small. But if you compare it to like the other big MMO makers, like Blizzard, I mean, Blizzard's massive with a massive budget, right? So WoW, of course, is going to be a much more better supported game. And I understand when Severlin was saying that, you know, it takes time and it's expensive implementing the 64-bit servers, because it's not just software. They're doing hardware investments too. And that investment into all that infrastructure, you know, is something that they got to do. It's going to take some time. Kill these. Where'd this guy? This guy's hiding in the tree. Look at this guy. This guy. Kill these wraiths, and that should get me out of here. No. Maybe. Okay. This is the old summoning chamber. This is where it was. They had a big gate up here. I missed that gate. Go down. There's a few more people. Oh, where'd this guy come from? Hello. Why, hello there. Oh, that would be cool. That'd be kind of cool, though. So, right. What do we got this time? Arcane skeleton, huh? He's gonna dance me, watch. Don't run away from me. Stop moving. Give me my money. As you can tell, I've done this quest a few times already by looking at my amount of XP. All right, let's see. What do we get keys-wise? Got 5. Got 5 keys. Nice. Okay. That means I can go run some dungeons. Let's go do shop till you drop. I gotta actually see if I have enough what I need. Okay, let's jump into the crypt. So it was nice to get information about why the did you notice that this one, shop till you drop, is the harbor? It's Hayward's. Smashing Pumpkins. Grave work. All right, let's go look at what ingredients I need. All right, I got enough spectral scales to get the mount. I got enough almonds. I need more caramels. I need cinnamon. I need apples. Need cinnamon apples. I need to do one more shadowy caramel run. Which one is shadowy caramel? That is getting ahead, right? Ooh, there's some lag there. Caramels? Yeah. I got time to run one. This gives almonds. almonds, doesn't it? Yes, I don't need almonds. I want to do a quick one, not too long. I need cinnamon and apples. That gives almonds.
I wouldn't even do it at level 32.
That gives almonds.
Because you can't do 5 levels above.
Yeah, you can. It goes up to 39. Yeah, because they... Nope. Nope, goes up to 39. There's cinnamon. Oh, let's just do a Hayward. Let me summon the higher. Might as well. Well, Trog, I hope you're able to get in and not have issues. Yes, I know you can run past all this stuff, but whatever. I'm going to kill it all. Oh, rune. Gotta hit the rune. So, but yeah, it was nice getting to ask about some of the events. You know, learn some of the stuff about why we get some things and why we don't get other things. Okay. Now we go across and up, around. Ooh. Activate the second word. And it's also interesting to know that these dungeons are created by new coder or new dungeon makers, new quest makers, and used kind of like a testing ground. It's kind of cool. And it's also interesting to know that whenever they do something with one of these quests, that they're also looking at fine-tuning the existing quest as well. Black Lock, I think, would make an excellent Night Revels quest. And you could shrink it down somewhere you don't have to go down and kill all the guys. Well, and that would be one of the things that they revisit. Is that big room with the lag. And they've been able to identify specific things that are causing issues in specific quests.
I mean, they've adjusted it before. It's different. The room is different.
Yeah.
You still get.
Oh, one skelly left. Like 3 mobs and an archer. 2 archers. You hamstrung me. You are not my friend. Okay. Lord Steffelair. Ooh, took con damage. That's not nice. A little bit of a chest. Okay. Where is, there's the word. Knew it was there somewhere. Oh, make yourself useful. Okay. Going up. Drop the magical shielding. At least I don't have to worry about traps. Okay. Let's see what other trouble we can get into. Hi, guys. Oh, I just hit that button at the wrong time. Okay. Kill some more skellies. All right. Get through this. So I will be posting the discussion with Tolero up on my YouTube channel. I'll probably cut out this gameplay, but I still had some time on my stream, so might as well take advantage of it. But no, overall, I thought it was a good discussion. Got to learn a lot of stuff that I didn't even know about the game. You know, and you know, it's interesting how we don't see the complexities that the developers have to go through for the game. See, monsters should spawn out of these boxes. Okay. All right. I'm getting a little bit of lag. It is not stop motion, but there is some stuff. It's a weep. See a weeping willow crying on its pillow. Oh, did it? No, it's still going. Okay. It's still going. Meredith. Or is it Myrith? Probably Myrith. Why are you attacking me? I'm trying to free you. Okay. 45 pinches of cinnamon. Where does that put me? 160. Oh, there's a chest. Hit the chest. They should put more in the chest. They should put more ingredients in the chest. Okay. Finishing out. Alrighty, well, that is going to wrap it up for me today, folks. I appreciate all of you guys being here and hanging out as we talk story with Tolero for about an hour and a half, and just kind of hanging out. If you guys are interested in this kind of stuff, I would love to do it more often. I can't guarantee that I'll get someone from Standing Stone every time, but I am more than willing to grab someone from the community and talk story with them too. So if you guys are interested, let me know. You can reach out to me on the Discord. I'm in the official Discord, so you guys can find me there under NomadDog. But yeah, if you guys are interested, just let me know. If there's topics you guys want discussed, I could find someone to talk about it with. And yeah, just have some fun. Alrighty, guys, have a fantastic rest of your weekend. If you want to catch me on my regular stream, it's Wednesday nights, Friday nights, starting at 6:30 p.m. Hawaii time, 9:30 Pacific, and 9:30 Pacific and 12:30 a.m. Eastern. It'll be that way for the next few weeks. Once the time changes, though, it'll be 8:30 Pacific and 11:30 a.m. or 11:30 p.m. Eastern. My time doesn't change, but everyone else's does. So, but if you want to catch me Wednesdays, Friday nights, 6:30 my time, 9:30 Pacific, and then back here on DDO stream. Next week, we will be getting back into the second part of Mists of Ravenloft. So we'll be doing a full run through of Amber Temple. I don't want to say I'm dreading that one, but that could be a long one, just like Invitation to Dinner was. But it should be a good time, and we'll have some fun. Alrighty, folks, take care. We'll talk with everyone later on. Aloha, and have a good day.
You get the Amber Temple because you have to do Raven at the door. There.